scary. What are you afraid of? Sometimes our fears can paralyze us and keep us from acting. And there are so many things that we could be afraid of. If you wake up in the middle of the night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, you stare at the ceiling, it seems like the gremlins start dancing around in our head. Whether we're worried about finances, we're worried about our children, our grandchildren, our parents, our grandparents, if we worry about the economy and the government recently, this past week, I was reading, and a study came out from Chapman University and was published in the Washington Post about the 12 greatest fears of the American people. What are you afraid of? Let's start with number 12, ghost. Are you afraid of ghosts? Well, there's some spooky old buildings around town, but it's number 12. Let's go up. How about clowns? Now, that's something that's really spooky. Number 11 in the American public's mind, we are afraid of clowns, and yet Bozo keeps running around, and Ronald McDonald, and there are clowns. We can look at number 10 now, the darkness. I started to have Orrin turn off the lights at this point, but we're not going to do that this morning. Let's move on up our list. Zombies. People are actually afraid of zombies because we've got them in the movies, I guess. I don't know, but people that are out in the world, and I think, frankly, this new generation is becoming more superstitious as people have moved away from churches. We're afraid of things that don't even exist. Let's come up our list, and we come to strangers. Stranger danger. We warn our children, we're afraid of our kids walking home by themselves. It's a scary world out there. Flying. I think mainly we're afraid of getting COVID or maybe sitting in those tiny seats or having to eat airplane food. Any number of those things could contribute to the fear of flying. Claustrophobia, being stuck in a tight space. Do you have trouble when you go for an MRI and they put you into the tube? And you know what I'm talking about. Our next one, fear of blood and needles. Being diabetic, I can say, yeah, this is one that you really need to be afraid of. Okay, come up our list, drowning, fear of the water. Bugs, critters, and snakes. Are you afraid of bears? Walking out there and something's going to come up. Are you afraid of spiders? The big hairy ones? Let's move on before we get too afraid. Heights. In Kansas, this is a pretty good place to be if you're afraid of heights, unless you're up on top of the silo, right? And fear of heights is there. The number one fear, it's been there for years, and that's fear of public speaking, doing what I'm doing right now. And if you could see, my knees are actually shaking underneath my jeans this morning. It's a scary thing. There are a lot of things that we could be afraid of. Maybe yours isn't on the list here, but I wonder if we had a list just for Christians, what are Christians afraid of? What are we afraid of this morning? And we need to think about that because fear can paralyze us. Fear can keep us from being all that God intends us to be. Our fears can keep us from growing. And Jesus was really concerned about that. In our daily Bible reading, we're coming up on Matthew chapter 25. And there Jesus tells a parable. And in the parable, we have an example of how fear can paralyze us. So let's read the parable together now. It's found in the book of Matthew, which is in the New Testament, the first book of the New Testament. If you'd like to follow along, we'll be in Matthew chapter 25, or we can read it off of the screen together. Matthew 25, beginning in verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went out at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I've made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I've made 2 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. We begin looking at this parable, and we're surprised. Because why didn't the master take the talents and take it to a financial advisor or to an investment company or to the bankers at least and give them the money if he wanted to increase his contribution? Well, that obviously wasn't his purpose. He was working with these 3 servants. He was concerned about them and their abilities. He was helping them to grow. He was giving them practical experience. God has invested in us. We need to think about that as we proceed, but I want to answer another question first. How much is a talent? You need to understand, a talent's not like we think about it. You know, the talents to sing and dance or play music or art. A talent in those days was a measure of money. How much? 75 pounds of gold. I want you to imagine that. That's a small child worth of gold. What would that feel like? Can you lift it? Can you open up the bag and look at that much gold sparkling back at you? Let's put it in other terms. It would be the equivalent, 1 talent would be how much the average man made over the course of a lifetime, 20 years of work. All of that in 1 bag. That's a pretty heavy responsibility, no pun intended. How would you invest that much gold? What would you do with it? If you were put in that position, if the master gave you 75 pounds of gold, I wouldn't even know where to begin. But there are some. For example, the first man, when he received the gold, he immediately went. He knew exactly. He was given 5 talents of gold. That's 350 pounds of gold. He had to have a wagon or something to carry that, but he immediately knew. He was experiencing these things and he was excited. He didn't dread it at all. He said, yes, I can do it. And he did. He doubled his money. That's pretty good. What did he do? Invest in land or commodities? Did he buy a factory? I don't know what he did, but he knew what he was going to do. The second man, the one who received the 2 talents, the 150 pounds of gold, he had to think about it for a little while. He wasn't as experienced as the 5-talent man. He had to sit down and think about it, and maybe he looked at some different options, but he then invested. He put it to work, and he did the same thing. He doubled the gold. 150 pounds became 300 pounds. That's kind of exciting. But let's think a little bit more. There came the day of reckoning. Now, we don't know how much time passed. This is a parable, but the master comes back, and the first man comes, and can you imagine? He's got 350 pounds of gold, and now he's got 700 pounds of gold. If you had invested with that man, you'd be pretty excited too. You would say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Good job." And that must have made him feel really good. And then he said, "I'm going to set you." In other words, this was a test. I was preparing you, and you passed the test with flying colors. Well done. I can trust you. And not only that, enter into the joy of your master. Now, of course, the master represents God in this case. And here we have the man who is welcomed into the kingdom, and it had to feel good. Well, likewise, the man who had 2 talents of gold. Same thing happens. The master uses exactly the same words. "Well done, good and faithful servant. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And these guys are great, but wait a minute. Third servant. What's his story? Well, we need to understand it because that's really the point of this particular parable. What did the 1-talent man think about his master? He's out there. He's got, sorry, hold it like this, huh? He's got 75 pounds of gold. Have you ever gone somewhere on a trip when you couldn't take the plastic with you? You had to have cash, and a lot of cash. How do you feel? I remember one time I went to buy a car and I paid cash for it. I went to the bank and I got out $8,000. I know that may not be much to y'all, but that's more than I'd seen in a long time, and have to work hard for that. And you're worried. That's paper money, but can you imagine how he felt with the gold? And not only that, but he thinks about the master, and he is intimidated. He's afraid. What does he say? "I knew you to be a hard man." I was afraid. Underline that. That's really the point of our lesson today. That's what we've got to work on when we leave the assembly. Here you have what is yours. Now use your sanctified imagination. Picture this. The first man has come in with his 700 pounds loaded on donkeys, or bringing a bunch of servants carrying in the money. The second man comes in and he's got 300 pounds of gold. As he brings in the 1 talent, did he bother putting it in a new sack? Or was it the same sack that he had buried in the backyard? It still kind of got, stuff on it. Is it dirty? Or was it a clean cloth when he opened it up? "Here's what's yours. I didn't lose it. Here it is." Go back to that first statement. "I knew you were a hard man." I want us to think about that just a little bit. When you think about God, what do you imagine? Does anybody have a dollar bill? Anybody have a dollar bill this morning? Would you look around? I think there's a dollar bill. I saw a brand new dollar bill that Tom got this morning that he put in the collection plate. Is there a dollar bill back there? Now, did somebody take that dollar bill out of the collection basket? There it is. No, it's still here. I was impressed by this dollar bill, Tom, because it's like they ironed it or something. You know. Oh, wait a minute. The ink just smudged. No, okay. But if you look at a dollar bill, if you look at the back of it, you know, the green side, there's this weird object. There's a pyramid with a big eye on top of it. Have you seen that? What is that? It's the all-seeing eye. And some people have this, I'm going to put it up here. Notice I didn't put it in my pocket. Okay, we'll put it up here and then in the basket in a minute. But some people have this image of God, that he's always watching. Were you afraid of that when you were a kid? You know, God is watching you. Well, that's true. God is watching. But he's watching to encourage us, not to condemn us. But some people are afraid of God. They think that he's some kind of cosmic policeman that's up there waiting to catch us breaking the law. Do you have the wrong image of God? Now, don't go to the other extreme. The all-seeing eye is on one hand. Santa Claus is on the other. Some people have this image of God that he's like Santa Claus who welcomes everybody. You know, come on in, sit on my lap. It's great. He's got a long, flowing white beard. That's not God either. Our God is a just God. And we need, I think, to spend a lot more time thinking about who God is. We need to not trust our imaginations, but to listen to what he has to say about himself. And most of all, as we're going through our daily Bible readings, to walk with Jesus, take him by the hand. Because when we see Jesus, we see God. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have in the world today is we don't have an adequate concept of who God is. He's somewhere between the all-seeing eye waiting to condemn and Santa Claus, who welcomes everybody except Hitler and Obama. Osama bin Laden. Yeah, not Obama. I'm sorry. That's a different person. All right? God is somewhere between there, and we need to understand who God is. We need to have the proper image of God. This servant was terrified of the master, and that fear paralyzed him and kept him from growing. What does the master say? You wicked and slothful servant. Put a note in the margin of your Bible. The word wicked there means evil. The Greek word is porno. That sound familiar? Yeah, it's in English too. It's evil, it's wicked. Pornography, evil writing, pornographic, okay? Porno. You porno servant. You wicked servant. Now, it can also mean worthless or dead end. Now, this is where we get ourselves in trouble. Because sometimes we think we're pretty smart and we can take shortcuts in life. That we don't do the hard work that we need to do, that we're going to take the easy way. Well, that easy way turns out to be a dead end. It is evil, it's worthless, it's a dead end. And so the master looks at the servant. He's given him the opportunity of a lifetime. No, the opportunity of an eternal lifetime. But you chose the dead end. You chose to sit and do nothing. Well, I didn't hurt anybody. I haven't done anything wicked. There are two kinds of sin. There are sins of omission and sins of commission. We understand sins of commission. We do bad things, but there's also sins of omission when we don't do what we should do. That servant should have invested the money, any investment. What do you think the master would have said if when the servant came back, he says, Master, I invested it and I lost it? Do you think the master would have punished him for trying? I'll give you an answer, no. What he was punished for was not trying. Why didn't he try? Because his fear paralyzed him. Now, the second word, you wicked and slothful servant. Sloth. Do we think about sloth being a sin? We might think it's a personality trait, a quirk, undesirable virtue. But a sin? Sloth is a sin. In fact, the ancients called it one of the 7 deadly sins because we don't get up and move. We come home at night and we fall down in front of the one-eyed monster and we don't grow. We let all kinds of things get in the way. Well, it's raining today, so I'm not going to go to church. It's sunny today, so I'm going to do something else. I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to make it to Bible class. I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to do the things that I should. Sloth will kill. Sloth is a sin, and it will separate us from God. We are called to live extraordinary lives. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, this is the King James Version, we read, "For we must all appear before the judgment, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad." The word bad, yeah, that's a good translation. But circle it, make a note of it, because the word bad can also be translated ordinary in this place. If you're just good or ordinary, it's used to describe a so-so painter, an ordinary flute player. Christians are called to live extraordinary lives. And I don't mean we climb the highest mountains, we swim the deepest seas, we make these great accomplishments. We live lives that are salt, light, and leaven. We live lives that shine so that when people say your name, they see God behind it. Here is a good person. Or they think, who? Who? An ordinary person? An average person? The average Joe? The average Betty? We are called to live extraordinary lives. Well, I don't know how to be extraordinary. The 5-talent man knew how to be extraordinary. The 2-talent man knew how to be extraordinary, but I'm just a 1-talent. The great thing about being a Christian is that God provides us with the power to do extraordinary things. He says, I want the best for you, and I'm going to help you succeed. I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit to give you power. I'm going to give you the instruction manual. I'm going to lay out examples. Follow in the footsteps of Jesus to live an extraordinary life. Don't be paralyzed by fear. Don't hide the talent in the earth and expect that that's going to be enough to be a prince or a princess in the kingdom of God. Brothers and sisters, what are you afraid of? Take the first step. When I first came to St. John, I gave a sermon out of Hebrews chapter 12. It's still one of my favorite passages where it says that Jesus is the pioneer of our faith. A pioneer is the one who goes first. Do you remember the story of the little boys at the swimming hole? You go to camp in the summertime, and at every camp, there's always this swimming hole, and there's a cliff. I want you to picture all the little boys standing up at the edge of the cliff, and they're looking down. If you jump off this cliff, you'll die. It's so far down there. One little boy always says, "You won't die." "Yes, you will. You'll die. If you jump off this cliff, you'll die." He says, "No, I won't." "All right. I double dog dare you to jump off this cliff." Well, it's a double dog dare, so you got to do it, right? And everybody's watching. He's not really going to do it, is he? He's not. And no, who's going to tell his parents when he's dead? And he jumps. Ah! What happens next? He comes up. Woo-hoo! He's not dead. What happens next? Everybody starts jumping off the cliff. Right? Jesus is the pioneer. He went first. He said, I'll take the first step. Now follow in my footsteps. You can do it. It may cause us at times for our heart to be in our throat. It may be fearsome to open up and ask someone, do you go to church? Do you know Jesus? Are you a Christian? What are you afraid of? God is calling us to a great life. God is calling us to enter into the Master's glory. And what do we have to do? Take the first step. Let's stand and sing this next hymn.